Hello YouTube. Bane666 here. Welcome to Propaganda of Toxic Feminism, the series in which I expose and debunk falsehoods, misconceptions, and outright lies spread about the men's rights movement. So let's get stuck into it.
So, I want to discuss two things, all in line with the Charleston shooting that took place just recently.
Meet the person behind the Exposing Men's Rights Activism Facebook page, as well as the Exposing MRAs YouTube channel. With names like that, I suspect she must present a plethora of well-sourced examples of nasty old MRAs, doing all kinds of evil shit, right? Well, let's have a look. As I write this, it's the 23rd of June. Their last post was on the 6th of June, and concerned PTSD Awareness Month. Which isn't really exposing MRAs, is it? But that's only one post, so let's continue. Next we have an article from something called The Daily Mash. The article is called, Internet Misogynists Given Chance to Meet a Woman. Let's read a bit. A group of online trolls have been introduced to an actual woman for the first time. We'll Meet is a new initiative where sexually vindictive internet obsessives can experience meeting a woman who is not in a browser window. A spokesman said, We'll Meet is a place where the socially petrified men who use the net as a repository for their unpleasantness can spend 20 closely monitored minutes talking to a woman who won't make fun of them. Waynes Hayes, 29, said, At first I was scared because she was fully clothed and much bigger than monitor size. But she was very nice. When I asked, she said that Nikki was her proper name, not a made-up name for being in porn films. Apparently most women aren't even in porn films. We had lots of similarities. I asked her what food women eat and she said it was the same as men. Oh look, sex-shaming anyone who disagrees with feminism. Now I find this very interesting considering what was stated in the very first video on the Exposing MRAs YouTube channel.
Also have the term white knight that I think ties in very closely with social justice warrior, and that's something that's specifically aimed at men mostly, saying that, well, you're only supportive of feminism or women's rights because you're trying to get something out of it, usually sex, which is... I always find it funny because not only is that's that same sort of rhetoric where it's you're projecting and assuming someone else's motives in order to not have to engage with what they're saying. You can just dismiss it out of hand because you assume that their motives are, I don't know, selfish. And
both arguments are sex-shaming. Saying you only support feminism to try to get laid is really no different than saying you are only against feminism because you cannot get laid. It reduces both motives to sex, in an attempt to dismiss issues. Now I've said numerous times before, that I'm against both sides using this type of argument. I think it's weak, and personally insulting as a man, that we are reduced to creatures that only think with our dicks. But should I assume that exposing men's rights activism are okay with sex shaming, as long as it's only done by them, of course. Now I do realize the post was a joke, but it does show a double standard, and I'm sure they wouldn't see sex-shaming tactics disguised as humor, the same way if aimed at them. But let's look at a couple of more posts. Next we have a reblog from Beauty is Inside, which is basically typical feminist talking points about unfair beauty standards for women. Next we have an image from Clinton Smith III, who is demonstrating a bit of white guilt. Then we have another post with feminist talking points. Then a post from Transgender Graphics. Then we have a post that reads, Intersectional feminism is and will always be about lifting all genders to the same, equal plane of existence politically, economically and socially. So next we have a reply to an Exposing Feminism post. Technically not an MRA Facebook page, although they are men's rights friendly, so let's have a look at the response. 1. What exactly are men suffering from as a result of feminism and bolstering the doctrine of gender equality? Well, there are a number of answers to this. The obvious one is feminism standing in our way, trying to shut us down, to silence us, and constantly insisting that they are the only option towards equality.
We've got lots and lots of services which are focused on women. Okay, so CAFE Ottawa, we're brand new and we're thinking about what we might be able to do. We want to be action oriented, we want to make a difference, we want to be involved with public education, and in the public education side we'll have events like this regularly. We have 4 planned for this year, this is the first. The next one will be...
Hey, MRA, we don't care what you say. Hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say.
Yeah, we know.
MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say. Hey, MRA, we don't care what you have to say.
Feminists insist on being the only voice, the one true faith, and anyone who disagrees is demonized. Now admittedly not all feminists are like this. As I pointed out numerous times before, I am a fan of Christina Hoffsummer's brand of equity feminism. I also like Paglia, and De Croo, and a handful of others who are actually more interested in equality than in going for gold in the oppression Olympics. But let's look at her next point. 2. Feminism is about promoting women for political purposes. And here I thought feminism was an entirely apolitical, home eco-class that taught women how to bake cakes. Also, I might add, feminism is about raising all genders that are not cisgender male to the same level that cis men have enjoyed for thousands of years. This really isn't a difficult concept if you make an effort to pick up a history book. Oh, so feminism isn't for male rights then? Well, at least not white straight males. So male suicide isn't a feminist issue. Male homelessness isn't a feminist issue. Male circumcision isn't a feminist issue. The bias in the family court isn't a feminist issue. The gender sentencing gap isn't a feminist issue. And need I point out that these things do not only affect white straight men. And in some cases, as in the sentencing gap, it affects black men more. But you see, this brand of feminism prioritizes suffering based on your assigned class. So for example, a wealthy middle to upper class, educated, employed woman, who is insecure about her weight, is given more priority than a straight white homeless man, who has to eat out of garbage bins. Because, vagina equals oppression. But let's be honest, they don't really give 2 shits about black homeless men, or gay homeless men either. On the other hand, I do. And this is why we need the men's rights movement. Let's look at her next point. 3. Apparently feminism is supposed to fix these Middle Eastern nations too, but quite clearly what they need is an entire re-imaging of humanity, not a gynocentric women are the only ones with problems approach, says whom, you Islamophobic, white savior, bullheaded fuck? How about we start by addressing the misconception that people in the Middle Eastern countries need saving at all? How about first world countries stop meddling in the affairs of other countries? How about we address the US planting puppet governments to gain control and influence over the region? I know it's difficult to think outside the box here, MRAs, but you want to complain about the draft and then go make white savior statements about countries that were fine until the US and NATO got to them. I really kid with MRA logic today. Wow. Now I should point out that I don't agree with everything America, or the West in general, has done in the past when it comes to interfering with other countries. But, that does not mean everything was misguided or harmful. And the idea that the Middle East was some kind of paradise before the evil US got involved is laughable. And here is why I cannot support this type of modern-day feminism. It makes a huge issue out of things like manspreading, yet sees no real issues with women in the Middle East. Because discussing gender inequality in the Middle East would be Islamophobic, and nasty white racists spreading their whiteness everywhere. Personally, I'm an atheist, and if I see something shitty in Islam, I'm going to point it out, just as I will do with Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism, Scientology, Wicca, or even atheism. But anyway, I've rambled on long enough, let's get back to our video.
So, I want to discuss two things, all in line with the Charleston shooting that took place just recently. Number one being the media trying to tie all of this towards mental illness, using the vague boogeyman term mental illness as the motive for something as heinous as what just happened.
I'm assuming then that she doesn't think mental illness should be used as an excuse every time a mother kills her children. Or is that somehow different? Next.
Even after the shooter stated that this was politically motivated and racially motivated, for some reason them wanting to cling to the term mental illness as the motive behind this shooting.
I don't doubt the shooter was motivated by racism, but that doesn't mean he wasn't mentally ill as well. It is possible to be both mentally ill and a racist. They are not mutually exclusive.
Obviously, that further stigmatizes mental illness and those who suffer mental illnesses. Me, I suffer from 3 mental illnesses, PTSD included. And having to deal with this, this seems to be the result after all mass shootings, is that immediately people are eagerly willing to jump to the conclusion that it was all motivated by mental illnesses.
Okay, first of all, I do agree that people, or more specifically, the media, are willing to jump to the conclusion that someone is mentally ill after something like a mass shooting. And although they shouldn't jump to such conclusions without evidence, I can understand why they might. It's because these actions are not normal, so it's natural for people to try to figure out why it happened. And in many cases these shootings are due to mental illness, or at very least it is a factor. But speculation is not the same thing as facts. So the media should refrain from jumping to conclusions, unless there is evidence to back those conclusions up. However, if there is evidence that the person was mentally ill, and that mental illness was a factor, then the media should most definitely discuss it. She is making the assumption that all mental illnesses are the same, or affect people in the same way. Which they are not. Someone suffering PTSD is not the same as someone who is psychotic, for example. The argument that, I'm mentally ill, and I have never killed someone, is kind of like saying, I have a cold, and I have never died of cancer. Just as all physical illnesses are not the same, nor are all mental illnesses. Next.
Instead of trying to think logically about the issue, especially after the shooter published some manifesto or made some statement that, obviously was politically charged, very racist, very sexist, very religious.
Once again, these things aren't mutually exclusive. Need I mention Valerie Solanas and her Scum Manifesto? She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, wrote a manifesto filled with hate, and attempted to kill a number of men, including Andy Warhol. The only reason she isn't classed as a mass shooter is because she was a bad shot and her gun jammed. She only served 3 years in prison for her attempted mass shooting, by the way. She was also a feminist, clearly influenced by feminism, and went on to influence future generations of feminists. And in case you are not familiar with her manifesto, SCUM stands for Society for Cutting Up Men.
Usually a bunch of white, deranged, mainly Christian dudes coming out making these statements and just gunning a bunch of people down, all of it being politically motivated.
White straight Christian dudes? So let me get this straight. It's wrong to generalize about mental illness, or even talk about it. But it's perfectly okay to generalize people based on race, sexuality, and gender, provided they are straight, white and male. Do you think maybe most mass shooters in America are white and straight, because the majority of the population is white and straight? And considering gay black men are a minority, don't you think maybe, just maybe, because there are so few of them compared to white straight men, that statistically they are less likely to be mass shooters? Let me put it another way. Brown eyes are far more common than green eyes, therefore statistically you would expect more mass shooters to have brown eyes. Now does the fact that most mass shooters have brown eyes mean that brown eyes cause mass shootings? Of course it fucking doesn't. Just like most Muslim suicide bombers in the Middle East are non-white, because whites are the minority there. But I hear you ask, what about gender? And it is true, males are more likely to commit mass shooting than females. Just as males are more likely to commit suicide. Could it be that maybe we need to discuss the mental health of men more?
This is what men's rights look like! 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 Yeah, they're fucking dumb! Fuck you! They're fucking pigs! How do you sleep at night, man? You fuckers!
Oh, that's right. When we try to do that, we are told by feminists that these topics don't need to be discussed. But hold on, women are statistically more likely to kill their own children, right? And considering most mothers in America are white and straight, does that mean there is a problem with white straight women? Is femininity somehow toxic? Oh, of course not, because in those cases we recognize mental illness. Funny that. Next.
It being very obvious days or even hours after the line of events took place and the media still wanting to cling to mental illness just further stigmatizes the issue, makes it so that it's virtually impossible for people like me to seek counsel or to even talk publicly about our mental illnesses without there being some stigma attached to it, without somebody watching me cautiously thinking that one day I'm going to go postal and just go and start shooting everybody and just...
So I'm guessing paranoia is one of her 3 mental illnesses. That's 2 down. I wonder what the third is.
Snipe everyone down. I'm happy to admit, and a lot of other people with mental illnesses are happy to admit that, we haven't killed anybody at all. We haven't harmed anybody at all. We're, perfectly normal people, functioning adults. We just are different than a lot of other people.
So she doesn't like mental illness to be seen as something negative, because the vast majority of people with mental illness don't go around killing people. Fair enough, she has a point. What a shame though, that she couldn't apply the same logic to white straight males.
To stigmatize mental illness further with these shootings, it just does a great disservice to people who suffer from mental illness, as well as to the victims who fell as a result of these hate crimes. Second thing I want to talk about, still in regards to Charleston shooting and to the Isla Vista shooting and a lot of other shootings that have recently occurred within the past 5 years as a result of extremist politics. These people were bred by this society.
You mean like Valerie Solanas?
I mean, if you read the manifesto that Elliot Rodger wrote, if you listen to the statements that this Dylan guy made, it's all very obvious that these people were politically motivated by the events and by the actions that they've taken, made it aware for months before the events transpired. Nobody decided to do anything about it, and if anything, there were people who were cheering them on, basically stating, oh, I agree with you, yeah, this is what's going on.
Oh no, I see where this is going.
Because the Isla Vista shooter was all up in these fringe groups, these men's rights groups.
Yeah, the thing is, Elliot Rodger had nothing to do with men's rights. He wasn't part of any groups. He wasn't subscribed to any YouTube channels. and there is no evidence he ever went to a single men's rights website. He never once mentioned men's rights, or even feminism for that matter. In fact, there is zero evidence that he had ever even heard of the movement. But by all means, please go ahead and prove me wrong. And by the way, I sent her a private message asking her to name the groups Elliot Rodger was a part of. As of yet, no reply, nor do I expect one. I sent her a private message as comments are disabled on her videos. So I'm calling her out publicly here. Name the men's rights web pages, YouTube channels, forums or groups that Rodger was a part of, and provide evidence, or withdraw your false allegation. Of course, doing neither of these things will just show you as a dishonest arsehole, who isn't actually interested in equality or human rights, but is only interested in spreading hate, lies and propaganda. Your choice. Put up or shut up. Next.
These pickup artist groups before he decided to go write his 140-page manifesto and start targeting people in sororities and whatnot. The same thing could be said for the Charleston shooter. His roommate stated that he's been planning this out for 6 months before this actually took place. And on top of that, the media's silence on the bigger issue that this was racially motivated, that this was politically motivated, just comes to show that it's easier for the media to draw the conclusion that it's all this mental illness and to further stigmatize people like me who already have to deal with stigmas because of things like post-traumatic stress disorder, as opposed to just addressing the issue that the United States is still a very racist country, that the racism did not just evaporate with the election of President Obama into office, that, you know, we still have South Carolina wanting to fly the Confederate flag and other people just saying that they agree with the shooter, that are publicly coming out and making very racist, very extremist statements in support of the shooter, just like what transpired with the Isla Vista shooting, when you had men's rights activists coming out stating that they supported Elliot Rodger and that it was all women's fault that this had happened.
Really? Men's rights activists did that, did they? Which is strange, because every single MRA I've ever seen comment on Elliot Rodger has condemned him. Every single one. So where are these mysterious MRAs who supported him? Name them and provide evidence, and I'll condemn them myself. But once again you won't, because they only exist in the feminist hive mind. Once again, put up or shut up. That's simple. You see, this is exactly why people like myself hate this brand of feminism. No trick is beneath them. They will lie, and slander, distort facts and evidence. They will just make shit up to demonize their opposition, while the whole time playing victim. Fucking amazing.
You know, the society is broken, and it's not mental illness. It's racism. It's extremist politics.
You mean like feminism?
It's something deeper than just pinning it out to an isolated issue and making this an isolated incident of mental illness, the boogeyman.
The boogeyman? You mean like what you do with men's rights activists? Or come to think of it, straight white males in general?
It's society. This country was built on racism. This country was built on sexism. This country was built on slavery. So, while this individual may have a mental illness, that was not what motivated him.
There is no way she can say his mental illness was not a possible factor. She did not know him. She was not his psychiatrist.
What motivated him was what he was brought up with. What motivated him was years of racist ideology. What motivated him was the fact that this country is still very much prejudiced against people who are not white. What motivated him was the fact that the media, that society, that even some parts of the education system, most likely where he was brought up on, state that racism is okay, that having these ideologies and that regarding people as inferiors is an okay mentality to have.
Really? News to me. All I see is society condemning racism, or even anything that might slightly resemble racism. The only groups that still seem to condone racism are the KKK, who no one takes serious, and social justice crusaders who hate white straight men. Interestingly though, they are often white themselves. I guess nothing says self-hate like social justice.
He was not motivated by anything other than the extremist politics that he was bred with, that he was raised with, and that he embraced and took action upon. The motive was not mental illness. The motive was racism.
I have no doubt that his racism was a major factor, most probably the major factor, but that does not exclude the possibility of other factors, such as mental illness. These things are never black and white. You know, being an MRA is basically signing up to be the underdog. Our opposition has all the influence in government, in education, and in the media. And we are vastly outnumbered. It sometimes feels like being one of the survivors on The Walking Dead. But in the 2.5 years I've been doing this, I have noticed a change in the tactics of our opposition. Their argument used to be, men don't have issues. And although we still hear that a lot, I seem to be coming across the argument, yes, men have issues too, but I see this as an improvement. Although admittedly we still have a long way to go. But it is an improvement nonetheless. At least now our issues are on the table. And that's a start. The fact that our opposition is now acknowledging we have issues, albeit reluctantly, is an improvement. And our next article is exactly one of those articles. The author acknowledges male issues, but then tries to excuse them away. This is a tactic that won't be successful for our opposition in the long term, as most reasonable people will start to see through it. But let's get stuck into the article. It's from Mamma Mia, and is titled, "There's a group of men who believe you are trying to ruin their lives. And I met them." Oh look, a completely unbiased title. Next. I am a man. Well, okay, sort of broadly a man. I don't really like cars, or know how to fix things, and it is possible that I sometimes reread my sister's Sweet Valley Highs. But I'm certainly enough of a man to know that the ability to pee standing up and look ugly naked does not necessarily lead to a lifetime of privilege. Oh look, he's starting with some gender stereotypes. Next. Men are a lot more likely to commit suicide than women, or end up on drugs or homeless. We make up the minority of university students, and the vast majority of prisoners. And, whether it be picking up rubber bins or going down a mine, we're often saddled with society's worst jobs. Okay, so clearly he is aware of at least some issues. Next. So, looking at the world through that lens, it's hard to see why the men's rights movement, or MRM, to use the lingo, should not be a positive thing. After all, we have cyclists' rights and tenants' rights and workers' rights and animals' rights. Why should 50% of the population not have few groups beat the rights drum as well? So far so good. But I think we all know this isn't going to last. Next. Why don't you have a chat with some of them? Said my editor at Mamma Mia, and I said, okay, with a weary sigh. But it turns out that making contact with Australia's 200 or so men's rights, as opposed to fathers' rights, activists is more easily said than done. I have to wonder where he got the 200 figure from. I have no idea of the number of MRAs in Australia, by the way, and I'm not really sure how you would figure out our numbers. As for contacting us, I have to wonder if he tried Men's Rights Sydney, which is part of Men's Rights Australia. They're good guys, I've met them. And for the record, that guy with the skull in the jug on YouTube was not contacted. Next. If these people are having meetings, they more or less have them in secret, and if they have an email address, then they don't seem to use it. Actually, we had a meeting last year in Melbourne and had an undercover reporter infiltrate it, using his own words, which is strange considering it was open to the public. Next. You cop a lot of flack for being a man who speaks out about men and men's issues, says one of the few activists that I did manage to get a hold of, a Townsville GP called Dr. Greg Canning. I'm fairly lucky in that I'm self-employed and I don't care what people write about me or say about me. I get awful things said about me all the time and so be it, but a lot of people can't afford to put their livelihood or career in jeopardy by saying something that's politically incorrect. The man has a point. If the MRM was to enter a popularity contest, it would end up somewhere between leprosy and Cardinal George Pell. The general perception is that it's an intellectually bereft ragbag of angry white men. Men who have recently been defeated in a rather poisonous custody battle, or got their arse kicked in a costly divorce. Men whose politics are rather to the right of the spectrum, and whose finances are not what they were. Men who are angry and hurting, and keen to take a swing at the opposite sex. Which are all stereotypes promoted by our opposition. Yes, some MRAs are divorced, many are married, many of us have never been married nor want to be, and some are gay. We are not all male or all white. There are some right-wingers, but there are also lefties, and centralists like myself. And that last line, men who are angry and hurting, and keen to take a swing at the opposite sex. Really? Yes, it's true we have an issue with feminists, both male and female. But feminist does not equate female. And yes, we do think women should be held accountable for their actions, just like males. It's called equality. But obviously it's easier to paint a group of people as misogynists, than actually tackle the issues they fight for. Next. And as it happens, that's all pretty true. To wade into the world of MRM websites is to wade into a world of tart-brain bitches, and vicious sluts. A world in which feminists are fat lesbian man-haters, and a disease that must be extirpated. Now you'll notice that all these comments have quotation marks around them, but no links or citations. Obviously, if you were to look through a forum or a comments section, you are bound to find some comments like these, but I'd argue that it's not the norm, nor the dominant voice. And it's easy to find even more vile comments on feminist sites, not to mention much more common. In fact, I think I'll point some out in the comments section of this very article. But we have a fair bit to get through before then. Next. Improving the plight of men, for many MRM activists, does not seem to have much to do with actual activism. Practical, sensible policy initiatives, like, say, shortening working hours or tweaking a few teaching methods, or maybe setting up some more men's shelters or suicide hotlines, are not exactly the order of the day. All of which are of concern to us, but as he stated towards the start of this article, there is apparently only 200 of us in Australia, and obviously we are not all in one city. So before opening men's shelters or starting hotlines, we need to increase numbers, by spreading awareness of issues. Which is difficult to do when journalistic hacks write articles like this one. But like I said at the start, this same article a few years ago would have been much worse, so we are gaining ground. Next. Instead, male liberation involves fighting and defeating an enemy, and that enemy, needless to say, is feminism. Women may earn less than men, spend the rest of their time doing chores, and get killed or raped in numbers every week, but it turns out that they're all in charge. Every improvement in the plight of women has apparently come at the expense of us men. So this is another common tactic, which is to project feminist rhetoric onto us, in an attempt to make us look silly, because only women need liberation in the West, right? Well no, Women don't need liberation in the West, and neither do men, but both groups do have issues. As for the rest of the paragraph, yes, it is true, women earn less than men, the key word here being earn. For example, men on average work longer hours. It's not hard to understand that if one person works longer hours than another, then that person earns more money. Which also accounts for why women do more domestic chores. Obviously, if the male partner works 40 hours a week, for example, and the female partner works 20, then she should do more of the housework. Needless to say, if both partners work equal hours, then they should share domestic chores equally, and if the female works longer hours, then the male should be doing more of the housework. But on average men work longer hours, and society expects them to work longer hours, so it's reasonable that on average women do more domestic duties. This is also amplified by having children. If women are unhappy with this, then it is up to them to change their lifestyle. Hey, why not give more fathers custody of their kids, so mothers can focus more on their career? Oh, what's that? You want your cake and to eat it too. Next. Until now, at least. Simply put, we are coming for you, says Paul Elam, the brains behind U.S. website, A Voice for Men, AVFM, a particularly vocal opponent of the feminist jackboot. All of you. And by the time we are done you will wax nostalgic over the days when all you had to deal with was someone expressing a desire to fuck you up your shop-worn ass. AVFM regards feminists and mangynists, feminist men, as a social malignancy. We extend to them no more courtesy or consideration than we would Klansmen, skinheads, neo-Nazis or other purveyors of hate. Golly. Okay, let's have a look at the quote, and by the time we are done you will wax nostalgic over the days when all you had to deal with was someone expressing a desire to fuck you up your shop-worn ass. Once again no link or citation, but I did hunt it down. It's from an article by Paul Elam, from 2011. I'll read a fair bit of it to you as I think it's important to have proper context. As always the link to the full article is below. Stalking Sady Doyle. Sady Doyle is a feminist blogger with a problem. She is concerned that for years she and her sisters in the struggle have been harassed, stalked, threatened, called names and otherwise made to feel uncomfortable. She's written herself a little advice piece over at unthesetimes.com, called The Girl's Guide to Staying Safe Online, in which she claims to have received a death threat, hate mail, rape threats and the like. She also claims that her photo inspired someone to pontificate about fucking her in the ass. Doyle doesn't mention precisely why she thinks all this is, allegedly, happening, except to say that apparently being a feminist blogger, or even having a female screen name, is enough. All these women have to do is screech online about men being pigs. Lie about everything from phony wage gaps to domestic violence to an imaginary rape culture, while they glorify their own bigotry and sense of entitlement. And then for some inexplicable reason they end up getting an occasional bit of nastiness via email or in the comments sections of men's websites. Fuck's sake, what has happened to the world that a girl can't even trash half the human race based on sex without someone getting all huffy about it? Of course, Sady, I ask that question rhetorically because I know the answer. The reactions you have seen over the past several years are just the beginning of a boil over that was inevitable from the moment gender feminism raised its ugly head. For the last 50 years, feminist ideologues like yourself have been given free rein to lie, distort, vilify and practice open hatred toward men and boys. You have been given pathological enabling by politicians, police, and a more than sizable portion of the well-trained and obsequious male population. You have been given almost godlike power over families and sufficient hegemony over the lives of men that you can effectively destroy them with no more effort than it takes to point a finger. And you have not hesitated to support a culture that embraces the use and abuse of those powers, and writes them into law. You have trumped over truth, reason and justice with an ersatz victim card, over and over again, and you even attempt to do so now, inferring that anyone who says things you don't like, about your ass or otherwise, is some sort of threat that must be dealt with, socially and legally. But no matter what you do, you are going to see a lot more of the things you don't like in the future. I don't mean that in the way of violent threats and continued fixation on your rectum, but in much more organized, high-impact consequences for those of your ilk, courtesy of the men's movement. Simply put, we are coming for you. All of you. And by the time we are done you will wax nostalgic over the days when all you had to deal with was someone expressing a desire to fuck you up your shop-worn ass. The fact is, Sady, you are a corrupt, hate-spreading bigot. I would ask you to remember that when you whine about a little rough talk, but it is pointless to ask someone to remember something they can't or won't acknowledge in the first place. I think you'll agree, context makes all the difference. Next. Greg Kenning, as it happens, is AVFM's Australian news director. His colourful history of fighting, Titty Hall, includes an offer to contribute funds to Paul Elam's efforts to track down an anonymous feminist blogger who clearly gave him the shits. Get ready to live a life of misery, you worthless Irish slut. We will never let you escape. So once again we are given quotes without links or citations. But I just so happen to hunt them down. It seems the author of this article has gotten all his quotes from an article called, Bash a Bitch, How Men's Rights Activists Hate Women, which is on Melinda Tancred-Riest's webpage. Melinda is a feminist from Canberra, Australia. Her article has a collection of quotes from AVFM, many of which don't actually link to AVFM but other sites. So once again we have this one blog quoting another which quotes another type thing, with limited reference to the original source. But I did the legwork, and it seems that the, get ready to live a life of misery, you worthless Irish slut. We will never let you escape, comment, can be traced back to an article called, Pamela O'Shaughnessy Exposed on AVFM. Now it's very important to note, that the comment does not appear in the article, but came from an email from, theyarecoming@usid.com. I hope this doesn't get too confusing. Maybe I should break it down from the start. RadFemHub was an online website where radical feminists would swap their vile hatred of anything male. This stuff was far worse than anything we have been accused of, yet no mainstream media attention strangely. However, AVFM did take them on. One of the contributors of RadFemHub went by the name of Vliet, but her real name is Pamela O'Shaughnessy. Apparently she's a best-selling author of legal thrillers. Paul Elam wrote about her in an article in 2011, called, Pamela O'Shaughnessy Exposed. For the record, as I've said numerous times before, I don't agree with doxing, even someone as vile as Pamela O'Shaughnessy. But let's look at what Paul's article claims Pamela O'Shaughnessy has said. That masculinity, by its nature, is a human social pathogen requiring extirpation. That the various incarnations of feminism previously thought to ameliorate the problem, have actually been absorbed and diluted by patriarchy, which she now refers to as the system. That biochemical alteration of men, as a collective, is a feasible means to address the problem. That end means and goals, along with scientific capability, should serve as the guiding rationale and compass for future actions, not human morality or rule of law. That radical feminists, free of social and legal constraints, must now secretly organize to further these ideas under the auspices of eradicating women's oppression. Now when I read this, something jumped out at me. I'm not sure how many of you caught it, so let me point it out. The first point reads, that masculinity, by its nature, is a human social pathogen requiring extirpation. Upon reading this I immediately knew I had read something very similar, actually just earlier today while working on this video. You might have caught it too. After all, it's not every day you hear the word extirpation, well at least I don't. But it was used earlier in this very Mamma Mia article and attributed to Paul. The quote read, to wade into the world of MRM websites is to wade into a world of tart-brain bitches and vicious sluts. A world in which feminists are fat lesbian man-haters and a disease that must be extirpated. So we have a radfem saying that masculinity, by its nature, is a human social pathogen requiring extirpation. And a quote attributed to Paul Elam saying that feminists are a disease that must be extirpated. The obvious quest should be, has a quote from a radical feminist been falsely attributed to Paul Elam? I would say the answer is no. But I think it's pretty clear that Paul's quote can be seen as a response to Pamela O'Shaughnessy's. Once again we have a little thing called context. The attributed quote from Paul apparently appeared in an AVFM comments section, and was catalogued along with many other quotes appearing in the Mamma Mia article, on a webpage called, A Voice for Creepy Men, Record of the Cyberstalking of Vliet Tiptree. Sounds completely unbiased. Next, Melinda Tancred-Rios comes along and gets many of her quotes from the A Voice for Creepy Men webpage. Eamon Evans, the author of the Mamma Mia piece, then comes along, and in an act of lazy journalism, gets all his quotes for his article from Melinda Tancred-Rios' one article. I think I can say this safely considering every quote I've seen so far appears also in the Melinda Tancred-Rios article, as well as the Melinda Tancred-Rios article mentioning Greg Canning. Which makes me wonder, when Eamon Evans said earlier that he found it difficult to contact Australian MRAs, did he even try, or did he come across Greg Canning's name in this article, and stop there? I guess it's a chicken or the egg scenario. Did Canning's name lead him to the article, or did the article lead him to Canning? Either way, it seems the full extent of his research, at least so far in the article, has been one anti-MRA article. Well, I guess there is still time for We Hunted the Mammoth. But just before we get back to the Mamma Mia article, one more thing about O'Shaughnessy and her desire to extirpate us males. You may notice that there was no screen capture of her comments in the AVFM article, so how do we know they are accurate? Fair's fair, right? Well, I happen to have hunted down a screen capture of the comment in question. Get ready to pause if you wish to read it. But Canning now says that he regrets having been a bit extreme in the past. I don't advocate being misogynistic and violent and burning down courthouses or whatever. So what, then, stripped of all vitriol, are these men's rights issues he speaks of? In what ways has my life been destroyed by all you feminazis, bimbo sapiens and parasites? Okay, sorry, we'll stop quoting now. Quoting? Quoting who, Eamon Evans? Next. Issue 1, Canning says, is child custody, and that might just an issue where MRM has a bit of a point. It does appear, to the observer, that Australia's child custody arrangements tend to favor the mother. Really? You think maybe a little bit? Notice the use of the words, appear to the observer, suggesting it's not necessarily a fact, but might just look that way. Nice try, Mr. Evans. Next. But there are many fathers' rights groups at work in this wide, brown land, and they're, generally a different beast to the MRM. They don't see a sinister feminist cabal lurking in Australia's corridors of power, they just think that something's a bit askew in the family court. There is still a long way to go to achieve equality, says the president of the Lone Fathers Association, Barry Williams, but this is not going to be achieved by denouncing the mother of the children. A bit askew? Are you fucking joking? Notice how he acknowledges the issue, but then minimizes it. Next he claims that others are already working to fix it. This role is usually filled by feminism. Because others are doing it, well, we just don't need those nasty MRAs who are like Hitler with a bad case of herpes. Acknowledge. Diminish. Dismiss. Next. Issue 2, from men's rights activists, is violence against women. According to Canning, it's not as common as, well, every statistician thinks. A man who grew up with 6 sisters, and a copy of The Female Eunuch on the bookshelf in our home, he got involved with the MRM after going through a particularly ugly divorce. I had a domestic violence order taken out against me which was trivial and false, but under advice from my legal people I accepted it without admission of guilt for the sake of not inflaming what was already a high-conflict situation, says the 50-something-year-old, who has since married Veronica, a clinical psychologist. But I am now aware that that is a very common tactic used in divorce situations for people to gain an upper hand, and the sad thing is that men are becoming aware of this too. So you start to see stories coming through of women who say that they've been falsely accused so that the man can get the upper hand in things. Very common? Really? It could well be true that false accusations are leveled every now and then, but you could say the same thing about any crime. Far more common, I'd guess, would be battered wives who say nothing, for fear of being hit yet again. Actually, both are issues. Yes, battered wives are a big issue, although I should say domestic abuse, as domestic abuse affects males as well. But wives using false claims in a divorce is also an issue. I'll link below to a video mirrored by Datman called, How to Throw Your Husband Out Divorce Advice. I believe it will clearly illustrate my point. I highly recommend you watch it. Next. Anyway, where were we? I think that domestic violence orders need to be assessed properly, says Canning, the same way that the legal system would assess any crime. Like most of Canning's arguments, this one carries a faint whiff of truth, but at the same time, clearly stinks. The standard way in which the legal system assesses crimes tends to take years and a lot of hard-to-find evidence. Handing out prevention orders to women who ask for them may well have screwed over 100 or more men. But it's almost certainly saved thousands of lives. Screwed over 100 or so men? Once again, no link or citation to where this number comes from, so I guess it's safe to say he pulled it from his arse. Next. Issue 3, believe it or not, is violence against men. It's assumed that women can't or won't be violent, whereas in reality they can be, says Canning. They don't do it as often as men, that's true, but if you're a victim it doesn't matter if it's a male or a female that attacked you, you're still a victim. So I just see a lot of double standards in the debate about this. It's hard to disagree with Canning's argument that a victim is a victim. But it would also be hard to find a feminist who does. He may as well argue that a table's a table, or assert that a chair is a chair. Of course it is not okay for a 50 kilograms woman to hit a 80 kilograms man. But if he hits her back, I'd say that that's as bad or worse. The key word here is if. There are many men who will not hit a woman even if attacked. Do you think we could all just agree that violence is wrong, regardless of who's doing it, male or female? But I think Greg Canning's point was that female violence is more likely to be ignored or excused, as our Mamma Mia author has just pointed out. Next. Dr. Canning, however, would not say this. The perception is that if it's a male and a female, having a biff, then the male is always at fault. A lot of family violence is mutual and combative, where both partners use violence. He hates the way, officially sanctioned feminist propaganda, paints all women as blameless victims of male violence and patriarchal oppression, and victim blaming can never be allowed. Now, there's no doubt that I'd be a bit silly if I took a stroll through some dodgy part of the city fingering money at 4 a.m. But would I be to blame if I got beaten up? No. Whoever attacked me would be. Canning's position seems dangerously close to, some women ask to be raped, territory, though, in fairness, he doesn't quite go there. His ever-charming editor at AVFM does, of course. Paul Elam is not a fan of women who walk through life with the equivalent of "I'm a stupid, conniving bitch, please rape me" neon sign glowing above their empty little narcissistic heads. And here, the author completely distorts Canning's points, and somehow likens it to rape apology. Amazing. But as far as Canning, a climate change denier and martial arts enthusiast, is concerned, he's just showing compassion for all parties. And compassion is something that feminists tend to have in short supply. Men, who talk about a problem, are often shouted down, he says, whereas when women have problems, they tend to get listened to. I think that men kill themselves far more often than they kill partners or children. He recently resigned from a part-time teaching position at Townsville's James Cook University because of a feminist colleague's sexual vilification of men. She, he says, is at the extreme side of feminism, which started out as a movement of equality to bring equal rights to men and women. But even though that's largely been achieved, there's still a group of people who believe men are evil. I think that there's a whole lot of double standards out there, and that there are two sides to the sexism and discrimination argument. At the end of the day, I just see myself as someone arguing for some degree of fairness in the whole thing. Me? Well, at the end of the day, I think that Greg needs to take a few chill pills. And maybe get a hobby, like building a men's shelter. So here we have yet another example of shitty journalism, more concerned about propaganda than facts. But let's look at a couple of the comments in the comments section. In my experience of these types of men, they make bold claims but rarely back themselves with credible information. There are a number of issues that Dr. Canning mentions that may need further investigation, but as I said, there needs to be credible stats issued so that he can prove that there is a problem. This is the problem with many men, they can only see situations from their own point of view. They forget that women for thousands of years have had to put up with being dominated by patriarchal societies and systems, with little or no opportunities to be any more than breeding machines, and housebound unpaid slaves, or in the Victorian times, bored well-dressed mannequins that are kept at home, only able to mix with those at their level of society, and to be married off to the wealthiest of suitors, from the most privileged of families, so that the family can climb the social ladder. The world has changed, and whether these men like it or not, they have to pick up your skirts and move on, by getting some professional help with their mummy issues, and start trying to be better people, and stop constantly throwing their toys out of the cot because life isn't fair, because in this day and age women don't have the time or the energy or the inclination to have a grown man-child on their hands, or a man-child to include into the family mix. Wow, let's look at one more. What a load of rubbish. The men are only committing suicide more frequently because they are a weaker being mentally, stronger physically, therefore should keep their strength to themselves and not share it with violence in the home. As far as child custody is concerned, people have to remember that the children cannot be split down the middle when there is a divorce, to please the adults. The system John Howard left us with, of 50-50 shared custody, does not work. The children are living out of a suitcase, and that is not normal. They don't know where to call home. That is sad. It is a system designed because John Howard buckled to the whimpering men, and now I hope it is backfiring on him with his own grandson. In nature the female is the nurturer. The lion rears the cubs, the mare rears the foal, the cows the calves, and the bitch the puppies. Tell me where it is ever the contrary. The common complaint, in a normal family, is that the dad never wakes up in the night to the children, the dads don't do anywhere near the housework statistically. Alas, the marriage has just failed, and now dad wants the kids 24/7 suddenly, when he hasn't managed it in the past. A miracle has happened, he is suddenly competent at being a mother figure. Mind-boggling transformation. If only he had transformed within the marriage, it may not have failed in the first place, and they could have all lived happily ever after. Women just need some support, many of them are run into the ground these days. They just keep on keeping on, no time for suicide. Women in the workplace also have some pretty grotty jobs, nurses, cleaners, child carers, the list goes on. The men need to wake up to the harsh reality of being a woman. It is not easy. I have reared 2 good sons and a daughter. My boys turn to, in the family home, very well, and they are non-violent masculine men. Sounds like a good reason not to be a feminist to me. Anyway, that's it folks. Until next time, always remember, don't drink the poison Kool-Aid.
Have you ever talked to someone who has really strong feelings on a particular subject or political issue, and you don't really realize that you don't have terribly strong feelings either way on this particular specific subject, and you don't realize it until you get into a minor argument with them, and they're talking about how they feel really strongly, and you're basically half agreeing with them and half kind of being skeptical of it, sort of. Not terribly passionate. You can't really give the world's most passionate answer to their discussion. Toxic feminism. Media manipulation. The men's rights activists are being confused with the pickup artist whom we hate so much. On our internet forums. Our internet forums are very important. lies, media manipulation, conspiracy, lies, manipulation. Ah!